"Mama, this is the best day ever." The little girl happily held her mother's hand after the birthday party. Though starving and with only one sandwich left from her shift, the mother smiled, watching her daughter's joy. Suddenly they saw a group of teens mocking an elderly homeless man. The mother stepped in to protect him, and even when she, realizing he was hungry, shared her last piece of bread. Days later, when the truth about the man was revealed, their lives would change forever. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We would love to hear your thoughts. The October rain hammered Detroit's cracked sidewalks, splashing cold droplets onto Clara Evans as she hurried down Lafayette Street, her worn sneakers leaving deep prints in the puddles beneath her. Maya's small hand grasped hers tightly as they passed Rosa's Mexican restaurant, where Clara should have been working the dinner shift. Instead, she had traded her hours for this simple joy of celebrating Maya's birthday. The neon lights from the restaurant flickered brightly against the wet pavement, casting playful red and green shadows in the rain. Maya's face was lit with joy, her stomach full after a meal of crispy fries and a juicy burger. Clara, however, had carefully refrained from indulging, knowing her stomach would be satisfied by the turkey sandwich she had saved for later, a humble reward for herself after the celebration. "Mama, this was the best day ever," Maya exclaimed, her voice overflowing with excitement. Clara smiled softly, her heart swelling with love for her daughter. But as they continued walking, Maya tugged gently at her sleeve, her voice full of innocent curiosity. "Mama, the food was so yummy. Why didn't you eat with me? You didn't even have a bite of the burger. Are you saving some for later?" Clara's heart squeezed at her daughter's question. She bent down to Maya's level, brushing the rain-dampened hair from her forehead with a gentle hand. "I'm not hungry right now. I'm just happy watching you enjoy your meal, baby girl." Clara forced cheerfulness into her exhausted voice. 3 years of single motherhood had taught her to never let Maya see her breaking. At 28, Clara looked older than her years. Her natural hair was pulled back in a protective style that she refreshed when she could afford it between her 3 jobs, waitressing at Rosa's, cleaning offices at night, and weekend shifts at the laundromat. Her dark skin showed the wear of constant work, coal-used hands bearing small burns from restaurant plates and chemical cracks from harsh cleaning supplies. But her brown eyes still held that stubborn fire that kept them afloat when everything tried to drag them under. The rain was getting heavier, and Maya's small frame was shivering despite Clara's attempt to shield her with an umbrella that had 3 broken ribs. That's when Clara heard the voices up ahead. Young, mocking, cruel. "Look at the old bum. Still think you're somebody important." Clara saw them before they saw her, 4 teenagers, maybe 17 or 18, surrounding an elderly homeless man who was pressed against the wall outside Kowalski's bakery. The man sat hunched over, rain dripping from gray hair onto clothes that might have been expensive once but were now rumpled and dirty. "Please," the elderly man said with quiet dignity, "I don't want any trouble." "Trouble?" One of the teenagers laughed harshly. "You're the trouble, old man. Stinking up our neighborhood with your crazy stories about being some rich guy." Another teen kicked at a small pile of the man's belongings. "Yeah, right, if you're so rich, where's your fancy car, your bodyguards?" Clara felt her protective instincts flare. She'd grown up on these streets, knew the difference between someone who deserved confrontation and someone who was just vulnerable. This elderly man radiated the quiet desperation of someone who'd lost everything but hadn't lost his essential decency. Clara called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd handled difficult situations before. "What's going on here?" The teenagers turned, sizing up this young black woman with a sick child. The ringleader, a skinny white kid with dead eyes, sneered, "Mind your own business, lady. This old fool's been bothering people, claiming he's some big-shot executive." Clara studied the elderly man's face and saw something that made her decision easy. Intelligence, sadness, but no malice. Meanwhile, these teenagers radiated the kind of casual cruelty that came from boredom and too much time unsupervised. "Well, he's not bothering me," Clara said firmly, moving between the teenagers and the elderly man, "and he's not bothering my daughter. So why don't you find something better to do?" "Or what?" The ringleader stepped closer, trying to intimidate her with his height advantage. Clara had worked in restaurants long enough to handle aggressive men who thought they could push her around. She met his gaze steadily, unafraid. Or nothing, I'm not threatening you. I'm just suggesting you move along before someone calls the police about teenagers harassing elderly people. The mention of police made them nervous. After a few more muttered insults and attempts to save face, they slouched away into the rainy evening. Clara turned to the elderly man, who was looking at her with a mixture of gratitude and surprise. "Sir, are you okay?" The man looked up, and Clara felt a jolt of surprise run through her. Sharp, intelligent eyes, pale blue in a weathered but unbroken face, not the glazed, defeated look she usually saw on Detroit's streets, not the hollow stare of addiction or mental illness. These eyes held clarity, maybe even calculation. He paused, and Clara caught the hesitation, the way he seemed to reconsider his words. His voice was cultured, educated, with only the slightest trace of a Midwest accent. "I'm fine, miss. Thank you for your help, that was very brave." But he clearly wasn't fine. Water was pooling around him, soaking through what had once been good leather shoes. His clothes were wrinkled and damp, and Clara could see him shivering despite his attempts to hide it. Worse, she could hear a deep, wet cough that spoke of chest congestion that could turn dangerous quickly in an elderly person. "When's the last time you ate something?" The question escaped before Clara could stop herself. She immediately regretted it, thinking of her empty refrigerator at home, the bills stacked on her kitchen counter. The man 70s, she guessed, with silver hair that had been well maintained until recently, hesitated. "It's been a while." Clara stared at the paper bag in her hand. Inside was a turkey sandwich she'd grabbed from Rosa's kitchen, her dinner for tonight, since Maya's medicine had claimed the money she'd planned to spend on groceries. She thought about going to bed hungry again, about Maya asking why there wasn't more food, about all the reasons she couldn't afford to be generous to strangers. But the man's cough was getting worse, and she could see fever in his bright eyes. Here, Clara pulled out the sandwich, her movements decisive despite the voice in her head screaming about her own needs. "It's not much, but it's fresh." The man stared at the offered food like it was something miraculous. When his pale fingers brushed her dark ones as he took the sandwich, she noticed they were soft, not the call-used, cracked hands of someone who'd been living rough for months. "Thank you," he said, and something in his voice suggested he meant more than just the sandwich. There was weight there, significance that seemed disproportionate to the simple gesture. "What's your name?" "Clara, this is Maya." "Clara and Maya," he repeated, and Clara had the strange sensation that he was memorizing the names, filing them away for future reference. "I'm Sam." Clara watched him chew slowly, each bite small as if he was afraid the sandwich might disappear before he finished. The rain kept falling, dripping off his silver hair and running down the deep lines on his face. He shivered despite trying to hide it, his shoulders drawn tight under the thin jacket. "You'll get sick sitting out here," Clara said, her voice firmer than she expected. "I'll manage," he replied, but his body betrayed him with a cough that shook his frame. Clara glanced at Maya. The little girl's brow was furrowed, her small hand tugging at Clara's sleeve. "Mama," Maya whispered, "he looks really cold." Clara felt the familiar war inside her, the need to protect her daughter against the risk of trusting strangers, and the tug of compassion that had guided her since the moment she saw the teenagers circling this man. She looked back at him, really looked this time. His eyes weren't empty like most people who'd given up. They held clarity, maybe even pride, but they were tired, very tired. "There's a storage shed behind our building," Clara heard herself say. "It's not much, just 4 walls and a roof, but it's dry, and warmer than this street. You can stay there a few nights if you want." The man blinked, as if he hadn't expected such an offer. "I wouldn't want to intrude." "You wouldn't be in our apartment," Clara clarified quickly, her protective instincts still in place. "It's just a shed. You'd have privacy, and it's close enough that I'd know you're not freezing to death in the rain." Maya's face brightened. "Mama, that's a good idea. He can stay near us, and we can check on him." The man hesitated, then gave a slow nod. "If you're sure, I can do small repairs, odd jobs. I'll find ways to contribute. I don't take charity lightly." Clara adjusted the umbrella over Maya's head, her mind already bracing for the neighbor's questions and the risk of letting a stranger so close, but her decision was made. "Come on then, let's get you out of this weather." For the first time that night, the old man smiled, not wide, but enough for Clara to see the gratitude behind it. "Thank you, Clara. I won't forget this." As they walked, Maya's energy seemed to brighten. Without hesitation, she slipped her small hand into Sam's, holding it with complete trust. She chatted happily about school, her favorite teacher Miss Rodriguez, and the drawing she had proudly displayed on their refrigerator at home. Clara observed, her body tensing as she considered stepping in, but Maya's instincts about people were usually spot on. The 6-year-old had an amazing ability to sense genuine kindness, and she had already sensed it in Sam. Sam listened to Maya's chatter with an attention that seemed genuine, asking follow-up questions about her artwork, laughing at her stories about playground drama. Clara found herself studying his profile as they walked through the rain. There was something familiar about him, though she couldn't place what. Maybe it was just the way he carried himself, confident despite his circumstances, like someone who was used to being in control even when he clearly wasn't. "You have a beautiful daughter," Sam said when Maya skipped ahead to splash in a particularly large puddle. "She's lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one." Clara replied automatically, then felt compelled to add, "Though some days it doesn't feel that way." "Single parenting is the hardest job in the world," Sam said with surprising understanding. "You're doing it alone." Clara's defenses went up slightly. "Maya's father isn't in the picture." "His loss," Sam said simply, and the complete lack of judgment in his voice made Clara's throat tighten unexpectedly. When was the last time someone had spoken to her about Jake's abandonment without making her feel like she'd somehow failed? When they reached the intersection, Clara expected Sam to thank them and head toward the shelter she'd mentioned. Instead, he stopped and turned to face her, his pale blue eyes serious in the glow of the streetlight. "Clara," he said, and her name sounded different in his cultured voice, "what you did tonight, giving me that sandwich, treating me like a human being instead of just another problem to step around, that meant more to me than you'll ever know. Anyone would have done the same thing." Clara said, though even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't true. Most people hurried past Detroit's homeless population without making eye contact, and she'd done the same thing countless times when her own needs were pressing. "No," Sam said with quiet conviction, "they wouldn't have. You saw me when most people would have looked away. That takes courage, and kindness, and a good heart. Your daughter is lucky to have you as a mother." Clara felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. When was the last time anyone had told her she was doing a good job as a parent? When was the last time anyone had noticed her kindness instead of just her struggles? "Take care of yourself, Sam," she said softly, tugging Maya closer. "You too, Clara, both of you." As they walked away, Maya looked back over her shoulder. "Mama, why did that man look so sad?" "Sometimes people go through hard times, baby girl. We can't fix everyone's problems, but we can be kind when we have the chance. Are we going through hard times too?" Clara's steps faltered slightly. Maya was too young to understand their financial situation, but smart enough to sense the constant undercurrent of worry that ran through their daily life. "Sometimes," Clara said honestly, "but we have each other, and that's what matters most." That night, after Clara had given Maya a lukewarm bath and tucked her into bed with stories instead of the bedtime snack they couldn't afford, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills that never seemed to get smaller. The electricity notice was stamped final in red letters. Rent was due in 3 days, and she was still $200 short even after picking up extra shifts. Maya needed new shoes. The ones she was wearing had holes that Clara had covered with duct tape, but the tape was peeling, and Detroit's November rain was already seeping through. Clara had always prided herself on being resourceful, on finding creative solutions to impossible problems. But lately, she felt like she was drowning, working harder and harder just to stay in the same desperate place. 3 jobs, and she still couldn't get ahead, couldn't build any kind of security for Maya's future. Clara was so worried that she fell asleep without realizing it. The next morning, she woke up groggily. As her eyes slowly opened, a soft sound from the door confused her. She glanced at the clock, realizing it was already morning. Still half dazed, Clara heard the knock at the door. Fully awake now, she walked to the door and peered through the peephole, surprised to see Sam standing in the hallway, looking much cleaner and more put together than just hours before. "Sam." Clara opened the door partway, keeping the chain latched. "What are you doing here? How did you find my apartment?" "I wanted to thank you properly," he said, and Clara noticed his clothes were different, still worn, but dry and less rumpled. "And to ask if there might be some work I could do to earn a meal. I'm handy with repairs, and I noticed your building could use some attention." Clara studied his face through the crack in the door, looking for signs of deception or hidden motives. But all she saw was sincerity and a kind of desperate hope that she recognized from her own mirror on the hardest days. "How did you find me?" she asked again. "You mentioned working at Rosa's Mexican restaurant. I asked around the neighborhood until someone pointed me toward this building. People around here know you, Clara. They speak highly of you and Maya." That was probably true. Clara had lived in this area for 3 years, and she'd always tried to be a good neighbor, helping elderly residents with their groceries, watching kids when parents worked late shifts, sharing what little she had when someone else was in crisis. "I can't pay you much," Clara said slowly, her practical side warring with an instinct she couldn't quite name. "Actually, I can't pay you anything right now, but I could make you breakfast if you want to fix that loose step on the front porch. The landlord's been promising to repair it for months, but you know how that goes." Sam's face lit up with something that looked like genuine pleasure. "That would be perfect." Clara smiled, though a sense of uncertainty lingered. She wasn't sure where this unexpected kindness would lead, but she appreciated the offer. After a long day, she headed out for her shifts, feeling the weight of all the responsibilities pressing on her. By the time Clara returned, it was late. Her feet ached from working 2 shifts, and exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. But as she stepped up to the front porch, she paused. The sound of tools clicking and the steady rhythm of someone working echoed from the porch. Sam was already there, carefully fixing the loose step with focused precision. His movements were smooth and practiced, as if he'd done this many times before. Clara stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. She hadn't expected him to take her up on the offer so quickly. With a small smile, she stepped inside to drop her things, grateful for his unexpected help. Maya handed Sam screws and chatted non-stop about everything that came to her 6-year-old mind, from her favorite school games to the drawing she was working on. Clara stood by the kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching them. She was struck by how natural the interaction seemed. Maya, so eager to be a part of everything, and Sam, patiently listening to her every word, as if he genuinely cared. It was a rare moment of peace amidst their busy lives, and Clara couldn't help but smile. Maya had never had a grandfather figure in her life. Clara's own father had left before she was born, and Jake had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with fatherhood, or any of the responsibilities that came with it. But here was this stranger, patiently explaining what he was doing, listening to Maya's questions with genuine interest, treating her like her thoughts mattered. "You're good with kids," Clara observed when she brought Sam a cup of coffee. "I haven't had much practice lately," Sam said, accepting the mug with hands that Clara noticed again were surprisingly soft for someone who'd supposedly been living on the streets. "But Maya makes it easy. She's special, Clara. Bright, curious, kind, just like her mother." Clara felt herself blushing despite her best efforts. "She's the best thing I ever did." "I can see that. She talks about you constantly. Mama says this, Mama did that. You're her whole world." "Sometimes I worry that's not enough," Clara admitted, surprised by her own honesty. "That she needs more than just me struggling to keep us afloat." Sam looked up from his work, his blue eyes serious. "Clara, can I tell you something? I've known wealthy families who had every advantage money could buy, but their children were starved for the kind of love and attention you give Maya. She's not missing out on anything important. She's lucky to have you." There was something in Sam's voice that suggested he spoke from experience, that he'd seen enough different kinds of families to make that comparison with authority. It was another piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit with the homeless man's story. Over the following days, Sam became a regular presence around the building. He fixed Mrs. Rodriguez's broken window latch, unclogged the drain in the basement laundry room that had been backing up for weeks, and painted over the graffiti that had appeared on the side wall. In return, Clara fed him breakfast and dinner, and other neighbors began offering him small jobs and meals. Clara found herself looking forward to their conversations more than she wanted to admit. Sam was educated, well-read, with stories about places Clara had only seen in movies or magazines, but he never talked down to her or made her feel ignorant about the things she didn't know. Instead, he asked about her life, her dreams, her thoughts on everything from local politics to Maya's education to the gentrification creeping through their neighborhood. "You're not from Detroit originally," Clara observed one evening as they sat on the front steps watching Maya play with the other neighborhood kids. The October air was crisp, and the street lights were just beginning to flicker on. "What makes you say that?" Sam asked, though Clara caught a flicker of something wariness cross his face. "Little things. The way you pronounce certain words. You know about places most people around here have never heard of. And," she hesitated, "and what? You don't act like someone who's been homeless for very long. You're too polished, too comfortable with yourself. Most people living on the streets, they carry themselves differently, more defensive. You act like you're just temporarily between situations." Sam was quiet for a long moment, and Clara worried she'd overstepped some invisible boundary, but when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than defensive. "You're very observant," he said finally. "You're right. I haven't been on the streets long. I had a different life before this, but sometimes life takes unexpected turns that you never see coming." "What kind of different life?" Sam watched Maya teaching another child how to jump rope, her laughter carrying across the small courtyard. "The kind where you have everything you thought you wanted, and realize it wasn't what you needed. Sometimes you have to lose everything to figure out what actually matters." Clara understood that sentiment more than Sam probably realized. She'd lost everything when Jake left, not just financial security, but her naive belief that love conquered all, that good people got happy endings just because they deserved them. She'd had to rebuild herself from scratch, learning to be both mother and father to Maya, learning to trust her own judgment when everyone else seemed to think she was making mistakes. "What matters?" Clara asked softly. "Connection, purpose, being useful to people who need you, not just people who want something from you." Sam met her eyes, and Clara felt something electric pass between them. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. Finding someone who sees you for who you really are, not what you can provide them. There was something in his tone that made Clara think he was talking about more than just philosophy. Someone had hurt him, betrayed him in a way that had shattered his faith in human nature. Clara recognized the signs because she'd been there herself. 2 weeks after that first rainy encounter, Clara's carefully balanced world began to crack apart at the seams. It started when she lost her weekend job at the laundromat. Due to staff cutbacks, the business was struggling, and they couldn't afford to pay all the employees. Then Rosa called her into the office with regret written across his weathered face. "Clara, Mia, you know I care about you and Maya," he said in his heavily accented English, unable to meet her eyes. "But I can't keep a waitress when the business can't afford to pay all the staff. I'm sorry, but I have to let you go." Standing outside Rosa's Mexican restaurant with her final paycheck in hand, $73 that wouldn't even cover a week's groceries, Clara felt the familiar panic of financial freefall. One job left, barely enough to cover half their rent, let alone Maya's needs. That's when Sam appeared, as if he had some kind of radar for her distress. "Clara, everything all right?" The whole story poured out: losing the jobs, the mounting bills, her fear about keeping Maya fed and housed. By the time she finished, Clara was crying angry, frustrated tears in front of Rosa's restaurant while evening customers walked past, carefully avoiding eye contact with the black woman having a breakdown on the sidewalk. "I can't keep doing this," she said desperately, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "Every time I think I'm getting stable, something happens. Maya deserves better than this constant struggle." Sam was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything. Finally he spoke with careful precision. "Clara, what if I told you I might be able to help? Not with money. I know you wouldn't accept that, mice, but with opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" There's a business incubator program downtown. They provide office space, mentorship, small startup loans for people with good ideas but no capital. You're smart, you understand customer service, you see solutions to problems that other people miss. Have you ever thought about starting your own business? Clara stared at him like he'd suggested she fly to the moon. Sam, I don't know anything about starting a business. But you know what working people need. You understand struggle, community, what makes neighborhoods function. That's worth more than most MBA programs teach. Something in his voice carried an authority that seemed at odds with his circumstances. How would a homeless man know about business incubators and MBA programs? It was another puzzle piece that didn't fit. How do you know about these programs? Clara asked suspiciously. Sam's pause was just a beat too long. I read about it in the library. They have computers there, business journals. Clara, the application deadline is next week. What could it hurt to try? Despite every logical objection her mind could raise, Clara found herself considering it. She'd always been good at organizing things, at seeing what needed fixing and figuring out how to fix it with limited resources. At Rosa's, she was the one other waitresses came to when they needed someone to cover a difficult table or smooth over a customer complaint. Maybe Sam was right. Maybe she did have something to offer beyond just serving other people's food. 3 weeks later, Clara stood in the gleaming lobby of a downtown office building she'd only ever seen from street level, wearing her one good interview outfit, a simple black dress she'd bought for job interviews years ago, and clutching a business proposal she'd spent sleepless nights developing. The community business incubator occupied the 15th floor, all glass and steel with views of the Detroit River. Maya sat in the waiting area, legs swinging as she colored in a book, having been excused from school for what Clara had optimistically called a family business meeting. The proposal Clara had developed was simple but comprehensive, a meal delivery service focused on healthy, affordable options for working families in underserved neighborhoods. She'd spent 2 weeks researching food deserts in Detroit, mapping out potential delivery routes, calculating costs down to the penny with the kind of precision that came from years of making every dollar count. This is impressive work, said Dr. Martinez, the program director, a Latina woman about Clara's age with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. Very thorough market research. What made you think of this particular business model? Personal experience, Clara said honestly. I've worked 3 jobs at once, missed meals because I couldn't afford groceries, lived in neighborhoods where the closest real supermarket was 40 minutes by bus with a transfer. I know exactly what families like mine need because I've been there. The interview lasted an hour, with Dr. Martinez asking detailed questions about Clara's target market, her operational plans, her financial projections. Clara answered each question with growing confidence, realizing that her years of struggle had given her insights that no textbook could provide. 2 days later, she got the call that changed everything. Miss Evans, I'm pleased to inform you that you've been accepted into our small business incubator program. We're offering you 6 months of free office space, weekly business mentoring sessions, and a startup loan of $5,000. Clara sank onto her couch, phone in hand, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. Are you serious? Dead serious? When can you start? When Clara told Sam the news that evening, his smile was radiant with what looked like genuine pride. I knew you could do it, he said with quiet conviction. Clara, this is just the beginning. But as her business began to take shape over the following months, Clara started noticing things about Sam that made her increasingly uncomfortable. The way he talked about business concepts with casual familiarity, as if he'd been in boardrooms rather than soup kitchens. How he always seemed to know exactly what resources were available in the city, which officials to contact, which forms to fill out. The expensive watch he thought she hadn't noticed, the quality of his shoes beneath the worn appearance. The truth came crashing down on a Tuesday morning in February, during a news segment playing in the incubator's break room. Richard Hale, founder and former CEO of Hale Technologies, has been missing for nearly 8 months, the anchor was saying. The tech billionaire's disappearance has sent shockwaves through Detroit's business community. Some are speculating about hostile takeover attempts by his adopted son and former protege, Ethan Ward. Clara's coffee mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the break room floor. There on the television screen was Sam Munger in the photo, clean-shaven and wearing an expensive suit, but unmistakably the same man who'd been fixing her building's mailboxes and reading bedtime stories to Maya. The news continued. Ward, who was taken in by Hale as a teenager and groomed as his successor, has consolidated control of the company's domestic operations, while Hale remains missing. However, sources close to the situation suggest that Hale's extensive international holdings remain beyond Ward's reach, protected by legal structures that require the founder's direct approval to access. Clara stood frozen in the break room, coffee and ceramic fragments at her feet, her world tilting completely off its axis. Sam wasn't some homeless man who'd found temporary work around her building. He was Richard Hale, one of Detroit's wealthiest and most influential businessmen, worth an estimated $800 million. Everything she thought she knew about him had been a lie. But why? What possible reason could a billionaire have for pretending to be homeless? What kind of game had he been playing with her and Maya? The questions tormented Clara for the rest of the day as she tried to focus on her work, tried to pretend her entire understanding of reality hadn't just been shattered. By evening she'd worked herself into a state of cold fury that surprised her with its intensity. That night, Clara confronted Sam in the building's small courtyard, where he was teaching Maya to play chess on a board he'd carved himself from scrap wood. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. Now something in her tone made Maya look up nervously from the chessboard. "Are you mad at Sam, Mama?" Clara softened her gaze but kept her voice firm. "Sam and I need to discuss some things, sweetheart. Why don't you go inside and start your homework for now?" Maya, sensing the tension, looked between the two adults. "But we're in the middle of a game. We'll finish it tomorrow, darling," Sam said gently, though Clara noticed the wariness in his blue eyes as he watched her face. After Maya reluctantly gathered her things and headed upstairs, Clara turned to face the man she'd thought she knew. "Richard Hale," she said quietly, watching him go still. His pale blue eyes searched her face for a long moment before he spoke. "How long have you known?" "Since this morning. Saw you on the news." "The missing billionaire," Clara said, her voice controlled, but the hurt bled through despite her best efforts. "How long were you planning to keep lying to me?" "Clara, my girl, let me explain something to you, can you? Can you explain why you let me worry about you sleeping in the cold while you had a mansion to go home to? Why you let me share food I could barely afford with someone who could buy and sell my entire world without even noticing the expense? It was never about the money, child. Sometimes, the things we think matter the most aren't really the ones that make a difference." Richard took a step toward her, urgency in his voice. "Clara, everything between us has been real, has it?" Clara's voice rose slightly before she caught herself, remembering that Maya was probably listening from upstairs. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you were conducting some kind of social experiment. Rich man slums it with the poor people, sees how the other half lives." Richard flinched, as if she'd struck him. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" Clara demanded. "Because I've been trying to figure it out all day and I keep coming back to the same conclusion. You weren't just hiding from your life, Richard. You were auditioning me, testing me to see if I was worthy of something." Richard's silence was answer enough. "My God," Clara breathed, pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. "You were looking for an heir, someone to leave your fortune to, and you decided to test drive the desperate single mother, see if she had the right character for the job." "It started that way," Richard admitted quietly, and Clara felt something break inside her chest. "But Clara, it became so much more." "Stop." Clara held up her hand, unable to listen to more justifications. "Just stop. Do you have any idea what you've done? Maya adores you, she draws pictures of you, talks about you constantly, includes you in her prayers at night. And you've been studying us like lab rats this whole time. That's not. Get away from me." Clara said, her voice deadly quiet. "Get away from me and stay away from Maya. I won't have her heart broken by someone who sees her as part of some billionaire's charity project." "Clara, please," I said, "get away from me." The raw pain in her voice seemed to hit Richard like a physical blow. He took a step back, his hands raised in surrender, and Clara saw something that looked like genuine anguish cross his features. "Clara, my girl, I never wanted to hurt you. But life, it's complicated, and sometimes we make decisions that come from places we don't fully understand at the time. He said softly, "You have to believe that." "I don't have to believe anything you tell me ever again," Clara replied, her voice hard. "You've lost that right." Richard left without another word, and Clara sank onto the courtyard bench, feeling as if the world had collapsed around her. She'd thought she'd found someone who saw her worth, who valued her for who she was rather than what she could provide. Instead, she had been auditioned, evaluated, tested, like a job candidate for a position she never applied for. Maya appeared in the courtyard doorway, a few minutes later, tears streaming down her face. "Mama, is Sam never coming back?" Clara pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her tight as they both cried for the man they thought they knew, and for the strange little family they thought they were building. "I don't know, baby," Clara whispered into Maya's hair. "I honestly don't know." 3 days passed in a haze of routine and grief. Clara threw herself into her business with desperate intensity, using work as an escape from the pain of Richard's deception. Maya kept asking about Sam, her questions growing more plaintive each day he didn't appear. By the third evening, the little girl had grown quiet and withdrawn, picking at her dinner and going to bed without her usual protests about story time. On the fourth morning, Clara found an envelope under her apartment door, with her name written in Richard's elegant handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened it. 3 days later, Clara found an envelope under her door. "Clara, I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. But there are things you need to understand. I'll be at the Fairmont Hotel downtown, room 2012, if you're willing to listen. Maya's college fund exists regardless of what happens between us. She deserves every opportunity." Richard that afternoon, Clara made a decision that surprised her. She asked Mrs. Rodriguez to watch Maya, and took the bus downtown. Richard answered his hotel room door immediately, looking haggard and older than his 72 years. "Clara, thank you for coming." She stepped into the elegant suite. "You said there were things I needed to understand, so talk." Richard poured himself water with shaking hands. "You're right that I was looking for an heir, but not the way you think." "Then explain it." 2 years ago I realized I had built this empire but had no one trustworthy to leave it to. I started thinking about legacy, not just money in accounts, but what kind of world I'd be leaving behind. Clara remained silent, watching his face. "I have $800 million, Clara. In the wrong hands, that's just more inequality, but in the right hands, it could change lives," Clara finished quietly. "Exactly, but how do you find the right hands? You can't just pick someone from a business magazine. Those people are already wealthy. They don't understand what it means to choose between medicine and groceries. So you went looking among poor people." "I went looking for someone with character without privilege, someone who understood real need because they'd lived it. And you found me giving away food I couldn't afford." "I found you," Richard confirmed. "A woman working multiple jobs to give her daughter opportunities. Someone who saw past appearances to human need." Clara walked to the windows, looking out at the Detroit River. "So you've been evaluating me this whole time." "It started that way," Richard admitted. "But Clara, somewhere along the way, it stopped being about finding an heir, and started being about finding something I didn't even know I was missing." "Which was what?" "Family. A daughter I could be proud of. A granddaughter who could teach me what unconditional love feels like." Clara turned from the window. "What exactly are you offering me?" "Partnership, a chance to build something meaningful with unlimited resources. Your meal delivery business is already proving you understand how to create solutions. Imagine what you could accomplish with proper funding. And what would be your role, whatever you wanted it to be? Advisor, mentor, father figure, your choice. This would be your vision, your leadership. And Maya would grow up knowing she can accomplish anything. Would see her mother changing the world instead of just surviving in it." Clara began pacing the room. "This is moving too fast. 3 days ago, I thought you were homeless. Now you're talking about making me your heir. I know it's overwhelming." "It's not overwhelming, Richard. It's terrifying. What if I disappoint you the way your protégé did?" Richard's expression darkened. "You won't. You don't know that. Don't I? When's the last time you spent money on yourself instead of Maya?" Clara opened her mouth, then closed it. She honestly couldn't remember. Clara, I've spent 2 years looking for someone who thinks about others before themselves. You do that automatically. Clara sank into a chair, exhausted. I need time to think. How much time? I don't know. This is life-changing stuff. While you're thinking, consider something. What would you do if money were no object? Clara was quiet for several minutes. Finally she spoke. I'd scale my meal delivery service nationwide, create job training programs for single mothers, fund educational scholarships, after-school programs in underserved neighborhoods, small business loans for women, maybe eventually affordable housing, healthcare clinics. You've thought about this before, Richard observed. Every single mother thinks about this, Clara said quietly. We all know what we would do differently if we had resources. Then let's find out what you can accomplish. Clara looked at Richard, really looked at him for the first time since learning his true identity. She saw a man who was genuinely excited about the possibility of using his wealth for something meaningful, but she also saw someone who had been betrayed before, someone who was taking an enormous risk by trusting her. If I agree to this, Clara said slowly, her voice measured, what would it mean practically? How would it work? There would be a formal competition, Richard replied with a sigh, as if the weight of the decision pressed down on him. A public business challenge where potential successors present their vision for using Hale Technologies' resources. The winner takes control of my international holdings. Clara's eyes widened in surprise. International holdings. Richard nodded, his gaze steady. The domestic company, the one Ethan thinks he's won, that's just the tip of the iceberg. My real wealth is tied up in overseas investments, international subsidiaries, holdings that he can't touch without my direct approval. And you want me to compete for control of all that? Clara asked, still absorbing the magnitude of his words. I want you to show the world what real leadership looks like, what it means to build something that serves people, instead of just generating profit for shareholders. Clara stood up again, her mind racing. Richard, even if I wanted to do this, and I'm not saying I do, I don't know anything about running a multinational corporation. You'd have the best advisors money can buy, Richard reassured her, his tone calm but firm. But Clara, the vision would be yours, the decisions would be yours, and you'd be competing against Ethan, who thinks he's already won. The mention of Ethan sent a chill down Clara's spine. What's he like? Smart, ruthless, completely convinced that profit maximization is the only measure of business success. He'll expect to win easily against any competitor I might choose, especially a black single mother from Detroit, with no formal business training. Clara said dryly, a wry smile tugging at her lips. Exactly, which is why he'll underestimate you completely. Clara was quiet for several moments, weighing possibilities against risks. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was insane, that she was nowhere near qualified for what Richard was proposing. But another part, the part that had always known she was capable of more than just surviving, was intrigued despite her better judgment. When is this competition supposed to happen? She asked, finally her voice steady, despite her growing unease. 6 weeks, in Geneva, at the international headquarters. Geneva. Clara's voice rose an octave in surprise. As in Switzerland, as in Switzerland. Richard's voice softened slightly. Clara, if you do this you'll be competing on the world stage. The winner takes control of a truly global empire. The magnitude of what Richard was proposing hit Clara like a physical force. I've never been outside of Michigan. Then it's time you saw how big your world could be. Clara took a deep breath, then another. If I do this, if I even consider it, I have conditions. Richard nodded, his expression serious. Name them. Complete honesty from now on. No more games, no more tests, no more lies of any kind. Agreed. Maya comes first, always. If this gets too complicated or dangerous for her, if she gets hurt by any of this, I walk away immediately. Of course, and I do this my way. I won't become someone I'm not to impress board members, or compete with your protégé. Richard smiled for the first time since she'd arrived, his eyes softening. Clara, being exactly who you are, is what makes you perfect for this. That evening, Clara sat at her kitchen table with Maya, trying to explain what was happening without overwhelming her 7-year-old daughter. Remember how Sam wasn't exactly who we thought he was? Clara began carefully. Maya nodded solemnly. You said he had a different name and a different life. Well, it turns out his real life is very different from what we knew. He has a big company, and he wants me to help run it. Maya's brown eyes widened with excitement. Like being a boss, something like that. But it would mean traveling to new places, maybe living somewhere different for a while. How would you feel about that? Maya was quiet for a moment, her young mind processing this information with the seriousness she brought to all important decisions. Would we still be together? She asked finally. Always, baby girl. We're a team, remember? And would Sam, would Richard be there too? Clara's throat tightened. I don't know, sweetheart, that's complicated. But he's not really bad, is he, Mama? Even though he lied about his name. Clara looked at her daughter, wise beyond her years, generous in her judgments, quick to forgive when adults failed to meet her expectations. No, baby, he's not bad, he just made some mistakes. Then maybe we should give him another chance. You always tell me everyone deserves second chances if they're really sorry. Out of the mouths of babes, Clara thought. She'd taught Maya to be forgiving, to look for the good in people even when they disappointed you. Now her own lessons were challenging her to practice what she'd preached. The flight to Geneva was Maya's first airplane ride, and her excitement distracted Clara from nervousness. Geneva was unlike anywhere Clara had ever seen. Pristine streets, elegant architecture, snow-capped mountains in the distance. The competition was held in the Hale Technologies International Headquarters, a gleaming glass tower on Lake Geneva's shores. The conference hall held board members from around the world, more diverse than Clara had expected. Ethan Ward was everything Clara expected, and worse. Tall, handsome, impeccably dressed, he looked at Clara with barely concealed disdain. So you're the waitress Richard's been mentoring, he said with a cold smile. How inspiring. I prefer entrepreneur, Clara replied evenly, though I'm proud of every job I've worked to support my daughter. Ethan's presentation was polished and professional, focused entirely on maximizing shareholder value through aggressive expansion and cost-cutting. The board members nodded approvingly. Then it was Clara's turn. She began not with slides but with a simple story. 3 years ago I was working 3 jobs to support my daughter, choosing between her medicine and groceries. I wasn't lazy, I was trapped in a system that doesn't provide pathways for working families to build better lives. The room fell silent, focused on Clara's quiet, steady voice. Today I run a successful business providing healthy meals to families like mine used to be. I employ 15 people, all single parents or people returning from unemployment. We're profitable, growing and making measurable difference. Clara clicked to her first slide. Not financial projections but photographs of her employees, customers, neighborhoods. Real faces, real families. Hale Technologies has resources to scale this model globally, not just meal delivery, but comprehensive support systems, job training, child care assistance, healthcare access, small business loans. We could create a new kind of corporation, one that measures success not just in profit margins but in lives transformed. She outlined her vision in detail. Comprehensive, researched, practical but ambitious. She talked about market opportunities in emerging economies, growing demand for corporate social responsibility, long-term profitability of investing in communities rather than extracting value. But what impacted the room most wasn't her charts, it was her obvious passion, her deep understanding of problems she was proposing to solve, her unshakable belief that business could be a force for good. When she finished, the room erupted in discussion. Board members asked pointed questions about implementation, sustainability, scalability. Clara answered with confidence born from lived experience. Miss Evans, said Dr. Kaufman, the board chairman, this is certainly admirable, but Hale Technologies is a for-profit corporation, not a charity. Our shareholders expect returns. Dr. Kaufman, everything I've proposed is profitable, Clara replied without hesitation. Companies focusing on stakeholder value consistently outperform those prioritizing only shareholder returns. Ethan leaned forward condescendingly. That's a lovely theory, Clara, but business isn't about feelings. It's about results, measurable outcomes. I have an MBA from Wharton and 15 years of experience. What qualifications do you have? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Clara felt every eye focused on her, but instead of feeling defensive, she felt calm. You're absolutely right, Ethan. I don't have an MBA, but I have something you don't, something that can't be taught in business school, which is, I understand what it means to fail, to struggle, to have my back against the wall and find a way forward anyway. Clara began moving around the room, making eye contact with each board member. You want my qualifications? I've managed complex logistics with no budget. I've negotiated deals with zero leverage. I've built relationships across barriers because my daughter's future depended on success. I've turned $25 and a business plan into a profitable company serving hundreds of families. Complete silence now, but most importantly, I've never forgotten what it feels like to need help. Every decision would be informed by that perspective. I would never approve strategies that maximize profits by exploiting the people our services are supposed to serve. Clara paused, looking directly at each board member. Can you say the same? Dr. Kaufman called for a recess. Clara stepped onto a terrace overlooking Lake Geneva, legs shaking from adrenaline. Richard found her there. That was incredible. I've never seen anyone command a room like that. I might have just lost everything by shooting my mouth off, Clara replied, though she felt oddly peaceful. You were honest. You showed them exactly why they need someone like you making decisions. Maya appeared on the terrace, having slipped away from the hotel room. Mama, did you win? We don't know yet, baby girl. The important people are still deciding. Maya looked between Clara and Richard seriously. Mama, you know how you tell me that doing the right thing is more important than winning. Yes, sweetheart. Well, you did the right thing in there. I was listening from outside, and you told them the truth about helping people. That's more important than any contest. Clara knelt to Maya's level, heart swelling. How did you get so wise? I learned from you, Maya said matter-of-factly, and from Richard. He taught me that having money isn't about buying stuff, it's about making other people's lives better. Richard's eyes filled with tears. Did I say that? Last week helping me with homework. You said the only good reason to have lots of money is so you can share it with people who need it more. Clara felt her heart clench, realizing that while she'd been angry with Richard, he'd been teaching her daughter about generosity and responsibility. An hour later, Dr. Kaufman called them back. After extensive deliberation, he announced, the board has reached a unanimous decision. Mr. Ward's presentation demonstrated impressive technical competency. Clara's heart began to sink. However, Dr. Kaufman continued, Miss Evans' vision represents something we believe is not just more profitable long-term, but absolutely necessary for responsible business. Clara held her breath. Her approach to stakeholder capitalism aligns with global trends towards sustainable practices. More importantly, her lived experience provides insights that cannot be acquired through traditional business education. Complete silence now. Therefore, pending final approval from Mr. Hale, the board unanimously selects Miss Clara Evans to lead international operations of Hale Technologies. Clara felt the world tilt. Are you saying? We're saying you are our choice to inherit and lead Mr. Hale's international business empire, worth approximately $800 million. The room erupted. Ethan stood abruptly, face white with rage. This is ridiculous, he said. You're giving control to someone with no formal business training. The shareholders will revolt. Mr. Ward, Dr. Kaufman said with quiet authority. Miss Evans will have extensive support, but her vision is exactly what this company needs. Ethan looked directly at Clara. You think you've won something. You have no idea what you're getting into. Running a global corporation will destroy you within 6 months. Clara met his gaze steadily. Maybe you're right, Ethan. Maybe I'll fail, but I'd rather fail trying to help people than succeed by exploiting them. Richard stepped forward with absolute authority. Ethan, you're done here. Security will escort you out. As security led Ethan away, he turned back. This isn't over. You have no idea who you're dealing with. But Clara was no longer paying attention. Maya had run to Richard, wrapping her arms around his waist. Does this mean you're really going to be my Papa Richard now? She asked with innocent directness. Richard knelt to Maya's eye level, voice gentle but serious. Maya, that would be up to your mama to decide. But I would be honored to be part of your family. however she thinks best. Maya looked back at Clara with hopeful eyes. Mama, Richard helped us when we needed it, and now we can help other people too. Isn't that what families do? Clara looked at the man who had lied to her, tested her, challenged her, and ultimately trusted her with more responsibility than she'd ever imagined possible. She saw someone who had been genuinely lost and found purpose through helping her discover her own strength. Yeah, baby girl, Clara said softly, voice thick with emotion. I think that's exactly what families do. 6 months later, Clara stood in her Geneva office, looking out at Lake Geneva while reviewing quarterly reports from 12 countries. Maya had adapted with typical resilience, learning French and German at the international school. The results spoke for themselves: productivity up across all divisions, employee satisfaction at record highs, attracting top talent who wanted to work for a company with clear social mission. Clara's stakeholder capitalism wasn't just working, it was proving that doing good and doing well weren't mutually exclusive. Mama, Maya said, appearing in the doorway with backpack still on. Can I ask you something? Always, sweetheart. Maya climbed into the chair across from Clara's desk. Do you ever miss our old life? When it was just you and me in the little apartment. Clara set down her reports. Sometimes. Do you? A little bit, Maya admitted. It was simpler then, smaller, but not necessarily better, right? Maya considered this with her usual seriousness. No, not better. Now we can help lots of families instead of just worrying about ourselves. And we have Papa Richard, and he makes you happy. What makes you think Papa Richard makes me happy? You smile more now. And you don't get that worried look when you're thinking about bills or my school clothes. Clara pulled Maya onto her lap. You're right, baby girl. Papa Richard has made our lives easier in a lot of ways, but more than that, he's helped me remember that I'm capable of more than I thought. Are you glad we're a family now? The question came with Maya's typical directness. Clara thought about the formal adoption papers that had made it official 6 months ago. Clara and Maya Hale, a family bound by choice rather than blood. Very glad, Clara said softly. Sometimes the best families are the ones we choose. That evening, Clara found Richard in the company library, reading reports from their South American operations. At 73, he'd officially stepped back from day-to-day management, but remained deeply involved as chairman emeritus and Clara's most trusted advisor. How was your day, daughter? He asked, looking up as she entered. The word still felt new and wonderful to both of them. Father and daughter by choice, bound by mutual respect and love rather than genetics. Productive. The Sao Paulo facility is exceeding projections, and the Mumbai expansion is ahead of schedule. Clara settled into the chair across from his. Papa Richard, can I ask you something personal? Of course. What do you see when you look at our life here? At me and Maya and this family we've built? Richard was quiet for a moment, setting aside his reports. I see the family I never thought I'd have, he said finally. I see a daughter who's exceeded every expectation I had, and most that I didn't know I could have. I see a granddaughter who's taught me what it means to be loved without conditions. And what do you want from this family? I want to be the father you deserve to have growing up. I want to watch Maya grow up knowing she can accomplish anything. I want to keep building meaningful things with you that will outlast both of us. Clara leaned forward. Papa Richard, I've been thinking about legacy, not just business legacy, but family legacy. What we're teaching Maya about responsibility, about using privilege to help others. What have you been thinking? That maybe it's time to make this official in every way. Not just the adoption papers, but a real succession plan. Maya understanding that she'll inherit something someday, and what that means. Richard's eyes brightened with interest. She's only 9, but she's already showing remarkable judgment for someone her age. Exactly. I want her to grow up understanding that wealth is a tool, not a trophy, that with great resources comes great responsibility. They found Maya in her room working on homework with focused concentration. When they told her about their plans to begin including her in age-appropriate discussions about the family business and her future role, she looked up with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. Does this mean I'll be a boss someday too? She asked. Someday, if that's what you want, Clara said. But first you need to understand what it really means. It's not about having power over people. It's about having responsibility for people. Like how you make sure all the families in our programs have enough food and good jobs. Exactly like that, Richard said proudly. Maya, your mama has shown that the best leaders are the ones who remember what it's like to need help. Over the following months they began Maya's education in earnest, not just traditional academics, but lessons in empathy, responsibility, and understanding different perspectives. Clara took her to visit Hale Technologies facilities around the world, showing her how business decisions affected real families. In São Paulo, Maya met children her own age whose parents worked in their food processing plant, understanding how their family business created opportunities for other families. In Mumbai, she saw how their job training programs helped women start their own small businesses. Mama, Maya said during their flight back to Geneva from India, "Is this why Papa Richard chose us? Because you understand what it's like to need help." "Partly," Clara said, "but also because he saw that we could be trusted with something important." Trust isn't about never making mistakes, Maya. It's about always trying to do the right thing, even when it's hard. 2 years later, Clara stood once again in the Geneva conference room where her life had changed so dramatically, but this time she was presenting the annual impact report for Hale Technologies' global social initiatives. The numbers were staggering: hundreds of thousands of jobs created, millions of families served, entire communities transformed. Maya, now 11, sat in the back of the room with Richard, taking notes in a journal she kept about family business meetings. She was still years away from real involvement, but Clara wanted her to observe, to understand the weight of decisions that affected so many lives. "The lesson we've learned over the past 5 years," Clara told the assembled board members and press, "is that when you invest in people instead of just extracting value from them, everyone wins. When you treat stakeholders as partners rather than resources to be exploited, you create sustainable prosperity." After the presentation, the 3 generations of Hales found themselves on their favorite terrace overlooking Lake Geneva. "Proud of you, daughter," Richard said, the words carrying all the love and respect he'd never been able to show a child of his own. "Proud of us, Papa," Clara corrected. "This is our legacy, all 3 of us." Maya looked up from her journal, where she'd been sketching the mountains across the lake. "Can I ask you something?" "Always," Clara and Richard said simultaneously, making Maya giggle. "When I'm grown up and it's my turn to run the company, will I be ready?" Clara and Richard exchanged a look over her head, the wordless communication of parents who shared the same hopes and fears for their child. "You'll be more than ready," Clara said softly, "because you'll have something neither Papa Richard nor I had when we started." "What's that?" "You'll have grown up understanding that business is about people, not just profits. You'll have seen how every decision affects real families. Most importantly, you'll have been raised by people who love you enough to teach you that with great privilege comes great responsibility." Richard knelt beside Maya's chair. "And you'll have something else, granddaughter." "What?" "You'll never forget that our family started with a simple act of kindness on a rainy street in Detroit. That reminder will keep you grounded no matter how big your world becomes." Maya nodded solemnly, understanding even at 11 that she was part of something larger than herself. As they watched the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and pink, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A sandwich shared with a stranger had led to family purpose and the kind of meaningful work that could change the world. But more than that, it had taught her the most important lesson of all. The most valuable inheritance wasn't money or power, or even opportunity. It was values. Is the knowledge that kindness creates more kindness, that lifting others up lifts everyone, that the greatest success is measured not by what you accumulate for yourself, but by what you make possible for others. The scared, exhausted single mother who had given away food she couldn't afford had grown into a global leader with resources to help millions. The lonely, betrayed billionaire who had tested strangers had found the family he'd been searching for without knowing it. And the bright-eyed little girl who had once worried about her mother's tears now dreamed of foundations she would start, problems she would solve, communities she would serve. Their story wasn't a fairy tale, it was something more valuable and lasting. It was proof that when you choose kindness over self-interest, when you build bridges instead of walls, when you see potential where others see problems, you don't just change one life, you change the world, one act of generosity at a time.
And in boardrooms and community centers, in schools and small businesses around the globe, the ripple effects of Clara's original kindness continued to spread. Other struggling mothers found opportunities they'd never dreamed possible. Other lost souls discovered purpose in meaningful work. Other unlikely families formed through bonds of choice rather than blood. All because 3 people had learned that real wealth isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the number of lives you touch, the communities you strengthen, the hope you kindle in hearts that had forgotten how to dream. The Hale family legacy would continue long after Clara and Richard were gone, carried forward by Maya and the countless others whose lives had been changed by their belief that everyone deserves a chance to build something better. It would live on in every scholarship awarded, every job created, every family lifted from poverty to possibility. Because the greatest inheritance of all is the knowledge that kindness once given freely creates an endless chain of hope that can transform the world, one heart, one family, one community at a time. And that chain, forged in the crucible of struggle, and strengthened by the choice to see opportunity in adversity, would endure as long as there were people willing to share their last sandwich with a stranger on a rainy night, trusting that tomorrow's world could be better than today's reality. In the end, that trust, that faith in human goodness, that belief in the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things, was the most valuable gift Richard Hale could leave his chosen daughter and granddaughter. Not the company, not the fortune, but the unshakable conviction that wealth was only meaningful when it served love, and love was only authentic when it served others. The billionaire's true heir had been found not in a boardroom or on a stock exchange, but in the generous heart of a woman who understood that the most important currency in the world wasn't money at all. It was compassion, shared freely and without expectation of return. And as the stars came out over Lake Geneva, reflecting like scattered diamonds on the dark water, 3 people who had chosen to become family sat together in comfortable silence, knowing they had built something that would outlast them all, a legacy of love in action, of privilege used in service, of hope made manifest in the daily choice to leave the world a little better than they found it. That was the true measure of wealth, that was the inheritance that really mattered. And that was the gift they would keep giving, generation after generation, world without end.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.